For 40 years, I've walked the line between worlds and am well versed in death. But I want to have faith in humans. Give me something to believe in. Earth below me, sky above me, fire within me. Brought to you by UPRN Network. I'm Trish Mo, and this is The Missing Piece. Good evening, New Orleans. I'm your host, Trish. I hope everyone can hear me. Actually, I can't hear myself, but I'm your host, Trish. This is The Missing Piece. It is Monday, November 28th, and we're broadcasting live from New Orleans, 105.3 FM, and United Public Radio Network, as well as numerous other Facebook channels across the board, Parapost Network, News on the Flip Side, all of those are as well. And you can join the chat room on Facebook or YouTube. Just make sure if you do it on Facebook, then that you give Grant StreamYard permission. And I changed my back. It literally looks like my light bulb went out behind me, and it looks like the sun, actually, because I had this one of those flame lights. Anyways, so I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. I did. I spent it with family, and I did not venture out on Black Friday. I think all of you are crazy that do that. Just kidding. But it was overall good. It was, I have been a little bit sick lately, so that that sucks. But it's that time of year that everything's going around. So I also, before I forget, I want to thank Carnation for sponsoring my show, and thank you all for being here and listening and supporting us. So I hope so. I want to ask if everyone, like with diet plans, I always get anxious around, I get anxious around Halloween because, of course, that's that's like New Year for the witches. And so I try to start, if you're wondering why we're always on top of our resolutions by January, it's because our New Year's is actually in October. So there is that. But I've been slacking on it. But I always have anxiety around the holidays because, aside from all the good food and everything, and exercise and so much going on, that it's easy to fall off the self-care routines and things like that. I'm pretty sure that's why people get sick, come to think of it, because it doesn't matter if you live in, the Bahamas, for that matter, or on some island where it's warm. I think it just, it's like the year coming to an end, and with that energy, I think of the 12 months like I do the hours in a day. That's why they say, like, millionaires and geniuses wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 in the morning. Because if you're thinking of the planet and planets, I guess, including, the sun, moon, all the planets, Earth, and being on a time cycle, which, I mean, timing is fluid, but for the human mind to comprehend this, if you think of it as like in Cinderella when she turns into a pumpkin by midnight. So I think that's like the cartoon version. Don't quote me on that one. So I'm gonna have somebody write in and be like, "Wait, she doesn't turn into a pumpkin. That's her carriage, Trisha." I know. But if you think of time in that manner, so 12 a.m. is the start of a new day, correct? At least in the United States, in our time. If you're going by military time, of course, that's a different story. But 12 a.m. So you start at 12 a.m. That's the beginning of the day, and you go through, basically 11 p.m., but 12 midnight, right? So at the beginning, you're refreshed. You have all that energy. You just slept. your brain is at its max capacity between, I would say, 3:30 and like 5 in the morning, 5 a.m. That's when you have some of your most productive um, thoughts and work, as far as intellectually, because it's the beginning of your energetic day. And then if you, yes, I don't know who's commenting, by the way. It just says Facebook user, unless you allow grant StreamYard access. I know it's stupid. They just started doing that a few months ago. But that's that's right. Like so exercise, that's another thing. As a trainer, I always met people at the gym at really early, and that's a good thing to do as well, because your body is also um, has more energy at that time. Um, I personally prefer, I have insomnia, so a lot of times for myself, I don't always work out until very late at night. So it just depends. I always change my schedule, um, but if you add a lot of those things, diet, that's why breakfast is the most important. It keeps you energized throughout the day. So if you exercise in the morning and you do your most intellectual work in the morning, you read, you do something creative, something to enhance your brain, or something, with your business, your job, or whatever you do, and you exercise. Sometimes, like I consider exercise almost like meditation. So if I'm running or on a treadmill or something, or lifting weights or whatever I'm doing, I'm also having all of these very creative thoughts, and um my mind's just going, because well, I have ADHD too, so I it really calms my mind when my hands and body is also moving. So I oftentimes take I always do. I always take nowadays a small notebook to the gym with me. Um, but if you consider all of that and the energy of the earth and day and daylight, then it's also losing energy by the end of the day, because it's at the end of that cycle. So I think it's the same with the months, I assume, because we're coming up on December, which is the 12th month of the year. And we've already gone through almost all, well, at least Kansas has 4 seasons. We've already gone through almost all the seasons. We've already cycled through all of these things, and we're coming up upon the end of the year. So I think there's a lot of chaotic energy in during this part of the year, and that's why people start getting sick. People start getting, there's so many other things, like you start worrying about, like, if you have business taxes, and like if you celebrate Christmas, or even Yule, or anything like that. And it's just stressful. So this all is actually relevant, especially like it looking like the sun's behind my head, as far as what I'm going to talk about tonight. So I know everyone thinks of holograms and astral travel and um, lasers and everything like that as something that you only see in the movies, something that has been a conspiracy theory for a very long time. It's something that has been talked about in science, in the science network and science world for many years. Uh, but I had never actually dived more into the government research projects on something like astral travel or holograms or anything like that until recently. And so I kind of wanted to discuss that tonight. And you can find any of this information, by the way, at CIA.gov, and it's under the Freedom of Information Act. They're declassified documents. I know, I know. Go use a public computer if you're afraid to be tracked. Like that. So, um, and if you all want to, feel free by all means in the chat room to give me your opinion on this, on holograms. If you think this entire world is a projection, a holographic image, I guess, or what your theory is on that. Put that in the chat room, as well as um, or I guess what you believe in the matter, because it's interesting. I know for the longest time, I absolutely, with UFOs, I absolutely believed in the concept of holograms uh, because I've seen it firsthand. I've experienced that. It started with me being, well, aside from me being abducted and stuff, it started with me being a photographer. And a lot of times with modern digital, which is why I like to use old school cameras, and I do, I do collect antique cameras, but digital cameras or even on your phone. One time I was taking pictures of an air show, and a lot of the more modern, um, fighter planes and things like that wouldn't show up on my camera. And I'm like, what in the world? And even, I would be taking a picture of the sunset or something of that matter, and there would be a jet going through and it wouldn't show up. So that's when it made me start thinking, okay, on digital, um, on electronics, if these things aren't showing up, how easy would it be to, especially I think of these things as a hypnotherapist, how easy would it be to kind of manipulate, it's like magic, manipulate our minds into thinking something is or isn't there. So, uh-oh, I got an angry from someone. um, but these technologies aren't secret at all. Oh, wait a minute. And there are more than those mentioned, but I still doubt that we live in a simulation. I'm torn on that. I'm only because of that's the thing. These technologies have been around. They've been testing well, they've probably been around much, much longer than humans have had access to them, but probably since, the beginning of time, technically, because of the energy. But as far as being a medium and such, my opinions of the simulation theory kind of go back and forth, because I've studied the Mayan prophecies and the belief system that the world ended in 2012 and none of us knew it. And and I've talked about this a lot to people, with the theory that if we all died at the same time back in 2012, would any of us know that we're dead? And then one of my guests, it was Quinn Stone, he was talking about um, the flash theory, like when a star burns out or a planet. Um, it still takes a while for that to catch up to, you're kind of living the energy it puts off is kind of a residual energy of the living planet or the star. So it's an interesting thing. What if we're just the residual energy of what we used to be? Laser light, yes. So that's another one, um, that actually, laser light doesn't exist in Natrum. It's an invention. So the green laser um, project, actually, this was from April 8th of 1965. Again, you can look this up. I'm sure it gave me permission to present these as a file online. However, once I tried to, it blocked that. So you can look them up yourself. CIA.gov, it's the Freedom of Information Act, but this is the green laser. So this was from April 8th, 1965. Um, and it blanks out, of course, the people that were involved, sometimes the countries, whatever, but it says blank has succeeded in making argon lays and produce a coherent beam in the blue-green spectral region. Several others have also succeeded, such as blank blank, but their devices are not on the market. Blank is located in the blank blank across the street from. They specialize in large high voltage installations for high power electronics and employ about 130 people. I started working on lasers for them several years ago when blank joined the company last year. They formed a subsidiary company called blank for the laser work. They have about 10 people. Uh, they produce both CW and pulse lasers covering wavelengths from 3511 angstroms, ultraviolet through green, yellow, orange, and red, on into the infrared to 12,066 angstroms or further. They have certain basic laser designs with interchangeable mirrors and plasma tubes. Various combinations of mirrors and plasma tubes will produce various colors and combinations of spectral lines. The model 3355 blue-green argon laser appears to be the most applicable. It is a pulse laser with 3 microsecond pulses at 120 pulses per second. And it can be driven faster if desired. It produces 6 spectral lines simultaneously. That's amazing. That's amazing technology, especially from 1965. So if you think this is new, this absolutely is not a modern. I mean, this has been around for a long time. They've been testing it for a long time. However, obviously, a lot of these weren't they weren't allowed to be released to in the Freedom of Information Act until more recent years. Yes, and I also so they I don't know a lot about it, but lasers are being used to perform surgery and such now as well. I know they do it on animals quite often. Um, and I mean that's not a new concept, but I guess it could be, they do like cosmetics work and stuff on humans. Um, but it an intensely powerful instrument. I mean, and throughout the years there's been so many movies that have joked about the concept and everybody thinks of Austin Powers uh as the laser so that a lot of those things but you go back and you watch these movies, and I've never even seen. I know I'm probably going to lose listeners for this, but I've never seen um Star Wars or Star Trek or any of those things. But I do know, because a lot of listeners tell me that a lot of stuff I talk about is a concept on those shows. And um, so somebody had to come up with those shows, So obviously the knowledge of it has been known for a very long time. Um, Now the thing about this green laser project, um, they talk about using it for hologram work, but they couldn't back then. I think they're having a hard time controlling the phase. Um, and it says, I suspect whoever wrote this report said, I suspect the phase sensitivity of the laser enlarger is similar to that of a hologram. Uh, Spectral sidebands due to the Doppler spread and spectral shifts due to vibration of the plasma tube are candidates for suspicion in the coherence and phasing problem. So they were also, um, the author of this report was working with Stanford University, who had purchased a CW argon laser in January of 1965. And they had a lot of graduate students conducting their experiments. So, um, and it said they had a lot of trouble with the lasers, but they mostly attributed that to their own setups. They have about 20 hours on the tube and expect it to go anytime. A plasma tube runs about, and it said blank. It didn't disclose that. So But it would be interesting to see, um, there's more UV pulse lasers, and you can probably buy a variety of laser instruments at Walmart. Yeah, that's true. Um, oh, that's right. I didn't think about architecture, for the measurements and length instruments. And then of course, so as a um, trainer and nutritionist and everything, as well as in my own healing from Lyme disease and everything else, I started different light spectrums are very healing in themselves, not on the um like blue light. There's actually a different blue light than what comes off of your computer screens and phones. There's blue light therapy they use for. You can use it for your face. You can use it. You can use red light therapy is very good for inflammation, muscle repair, collagen, and increasing collagen, things like that. And then there's so many other but you have to use specific spectrums of it, specific frequencies, because it's not something that you can just go out and get like a Christmas tree light bulb or something. You know what I mean? It's a very it's a very high tech technology, and they do have things like that available. I just bought like the face mask thing uh recently, and it's very affordable. I'm a Tre- I'm a Trekkie, but thank you. Yes, I don't know why I never got. I was probably because when Star Trek and those shows, my mom used to watch those things back in the when I was younger in the early 80s. And now in hindsight, since I was being abducted all the time, I was kind of triggered by anything that had to do with like airplanes or spaceships or, extraterrestrials back then. Thanks, Augie. Uh, yeah, so it's aside from the green laser though, I got into more of this, and y- you all need to go check out Russia's involvement in uh, doing using different effects. I couldn't. It's a very very long report. I mean, very long, and parts of it are translated obviously in Russian, and I don't currently speak Russian, but it's very interesting the scientific reports they have that are now in the Freedom of Information Act regarding holograms and the giant space microscope and Mars, actually. It's very interesting to to read about that because, as you all know, most things I do, I'm one of those people that has to see it to believe it, which is odd since I'm also a medium. But believe me, I've done scientific research or historical research on anything. I don't even believe ghosts. I mean, until it's like so my method of investigation into anything like this, because this was a channeled concept or thoughts put out in the world today, actually. Well, not today, it's been for a few weeks. I'll get words, messages, whatever. um but then I go and I'm like, what? And then I never believe the first thing I see or read or whatever about it or study. And then I have to study other concepts, of course, and y'all should see. I should write like science journals because y'all would be like, "Oh my god." Like, no wonder she never sleeps. Um, but it's an interesting thing because they have a very long report. I mean, this came out like it was authorized for release at the end of October 2022. So just recently. Just recently. And I guarantee, like everything else, again, I said I get a lot of this information from, well, probably from extraterrestrials for that matter, someone, because
Usually it happens that I put something out randomly, but I'm not very organized, or I don't have the proper title for such scientific research, I suppose. Um, I should do that. I should go back and get my well, I'm working on that, but I should go back and get my doctorate just so I can, put that stamp on it. But a lot of times after I write something or after I put something out on one of my shows, um, of course, like a month or two later, it'll show up on all these like history, 80, whatever, you know, other channels, Gaia. Um, so another thing with you can't just read when you go on that website. I mean, it's pretty easy to navigate, and you can search for any project you want to look up. But um, make sure you click on the attachment, because for every report, there's this big body of text below it when you search for it, and it tells you the document type, the collection, um, its release date, things like that. You'll be amazed at when some of these things were released to the public, and you'll be like, well, how did nobody know about this? Um, how did we not hear about this, through the media or what? Well, obviously there's reasons, because many of these were published. So the research was done in the 60s. They were published in the 80s, and then we just found it, they were created online, and like from anywhere from just recently to like 2015, 16, things like that. So um I fear that someone succeeds in building a gamma ray laser. That would be a terrible weapon. It could destroy buildings and shoot down airplanes and satellites, exactly as seen in sci-fi movies. I, I mean, not scare people, of course, and but that's probably been a thing for a really long time. Like I said, back in, so Austin Powers was set in what, 70s, I think. Like it was retro. It was like the hippie era. So that's probably when that came out, and whoever made the movie, that was kind of a, little hint to that. So one of a lot of these, which is interesting. So I took a picture. This is how I channel, right? This information that comes out. I took a picture. I was wearing and I tried to load that too tonight, but it wouldn't. I took a picture of me wearing. I have this Marilyn Monroe shirt that I wore to the gym, and it has Marilyn Monroe's face with a mask over it, like like everybody wore during COVID. And then it has some kanji on the side, and cherry blossoms. And I took that next to a Marilyn Monroe um, piece, like art portrait that I had in my house. And I thought that was funny, because the same day when I started researching this, all of this research on it's called the Gateway Program, um, came from the Monroe Institute um, of Applied Sciences. And Gateway, uh, this is why I go back and forth on the stimulation thing, because there's quite a few very, very active UFO areas, I guess, or even paranormal, ghosts, spirit places, things like that, where I've been before I ever knew anything about a gateway or a gateway project or portals or anything else. And every single one I have ever been to, there's something there that says gateway, and then there's also something there that's, yes, I know. You could say, "Oh, that's just a coincidence, Trish," because there's streets named the same thing. There's places named the same thing all over the world, and but this is specifically at these places that have so much activity. So it makes you wonder. 1960s, swinging London. Okay. that's relevant also because because I was making a lot of digital art, like retro art for my store, for my online store, and I had a shirt on with the pineapple on it, with pineapples on it. I didn't know. I mean, I like pineapples, and I didn't know that. And I have nothing against swingers. I mean, you do you. Like there, but I didn't know that that was a symbol for it for the swinging community. So that's interesting. Um, and that's probably why every time I have a dress too with pineapples all over it. Um, people approach me. It's so funny. Um, but back to gosh, a squirrel. Uh, so every one of these places has something in regards to Monroe, or Gateway, and St. Louis, for instance. This is funny because the CIA, when you search for that, um, the CIA actually has a postcard from um I think it said like the 60s or 70s, um that says, you know, Gateway to the West, which is what it's always been called. The Big Arch is called the Gateway to the West. But I found that interesting that that's on this, like that's a hint, you know, like that's on the CIA site, right right in the middle of all of these other reports. And it's just a postcard. It's a retro postcard, like vintage. Um so that's interesting, and everyone knows that St. Louis, we're literally on the UFO highway here, as far as ley lines and things like that. So, uh-oh, here I have a spammer in the chat room. Okay. Um, so this communication from the Monroe Institute, it states that the gateway, this program, so I it's very hard to assume if it's just if it's just like an exercise of theirs, or if it's a process, or but at some different points it makes it sound almost like artificial intelligence, and I suppose it could be all of the above. But it says gateways dedicated to the development and exploration of human consciousness. It's a system of exercises designed to aid the individual in the improvement of his own consciousness, so that he may know and understand better his higher self, that he may learn and experience profound areas of expanded awareness, achieve and willfully control his physical body and out of body state, communicate with and visit other energy structures and realities. Yes, this is on the CIA. I know some people, you know, to me and most people on this network probably, who already, like, we live in this in this, that is our reality. um to some people it's not, you know, they're still living in the very much the 3D, where this hasn't been a concept ever in their lives. So that's important to note. I know older generations, you know, who are obviously not as spiritually awakened and more very set in their ways as far as science and religion and everything else. They might not have that there, or even have ever fathomed this concept. So um, this originally the M5000 research project, which is the present Gateway program, is a result of over 3,000 test exercises involving 1,932 participants conducted by the Institute over the past 10 years. Now, this was released in December of 98, December 4th of 98, which is interesting that I look this up now because it's coming up. The document wasn't created obviously until 2016. So, reports from the participants themselves Sorry about that. I got kicked off, of course. Every time I'm talking about something I shouldn't, I get kicked off. I get kicked off the air. So that was a short interlude. Let's see. Except for the movies were set in the 90s. Except for The Spy Who Shagged Me and Austin Powers and Goldmember, where he travels in time. Yeah, so all of those, I mean, obviously. So just in case, if you're still in the chat room, what about the theory that someone else is controlling our reality and the reality we live in is just a giant movie? Because there is, there's also that, which would technically be a simulation, I guess. But if it were a simulation, why would they release these documents to us just to mess with us? Like, let's see what they do. Let's see what the Sims do when they when we tell them the truth. But what I found, I guess I should say that it doesn't matter whether you're talking about science or health or it could be anything, the weather, gardening, I don't care what it is. If someone isn't ready to accept that concept, then there's nothing you can do to persuade them differently. So I think, especially in government things and with the world and everything nowadays, most come right out and it's like right there in front of you, and it's something that's been in front, like right under our nose all along, and people fail to see it, and that's why they do it. It's because like it doesn't matter. People aren't going to believe them anyways, so they might as well tell the truth, you know what I mean? um Partially why it's the same with people coming forward now, um influencers and people, a lot of people, experiencers, people who believe in spirits and all these things are coming forward now because it is more accepted. But on the flip side of that, they're like, well, I mean, people probably won't believe me anyways, so I might as well. It's like half the things that come out of my mouth, and then all of a sudden, it's one of those things that usually when it has to do with like my family or friends or whatever, they think I'm absolutely crazy, and then that exact thing happens a few years later. Um, they just didn't believe it because it was only coming from one person, which is crazy that we're like that as humans. Myself included. There's been many times, I'm sure, that I just couldn't wrap my mind around. Shoot, like even in my 20s, if I would have been told or researched half the things that I do now, I would have said that everyone was crazy. I would have said that there is no way that any of that exists. Um, but I think again, once you're, and I think that's why people hit like their midlife crisis per se, and they're between their 30s and 50s, because again, it's that energy thing. If you think that people live to be between 80 and 100, something, um your 40s are your midlife. So if you're talking about that energy, it's it's kind of a point. It's like lunch. It's like your lunch break. You kind of get a refreshed state in life. You can go back to school. You can do all kinds of things because your brain has a new lease on life, literally, and mine quite figuratively, because um or quite literally. I'm sorry, because I was, I want to say 38. I think I was 38 and 39 when I had my last heart attack. So, but the time that I actually had a near death experience, I was 38. Um, So it was like going back to school, I tease and say that I'm like a fourth grader now, as far as all of the things that I've gone back to research, because which makes sense, like that show that came out a while, it's been years, but Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Um, and people didn't know, or when they looked at the same concepts with their adult mind, opposed to when they were, in fifth grade, they saw it from a very different perspective. I believe that we are strongly influenced by upbringing and media, and in that sense, we cannot see objectively. I'm a sci-fi and mystery writer since 1986. This issue always had my interest. Sci-fi has a lot of unexplainable examples of predictions that came true. It does. Because I think I've been studying this a lot lately, because everything's already happened in the future, in the past. Everything goes through cycles. Um, and I'm actually writing about that as well, because I have so many experiences with that happening, and I've always said that I don't believe in psychics in a manner that they just pull information out of thin air. No, I think that, you know making predictions and everything myself, I think that we're either given that information from whatever, ETs, a higher power, your ancestors, spirit guides, maybe all of them. um I know my messages come in many different ways, or we've already lived it. Now, which could be both as well, because if you believe in reincarnation, then yes, we've all already lived everything, and it's just like a soap opera. Like my mom still watches what is it? Not Days of Our Lives. There's another one that I swear has been on since, I don't know, since I was like can remember, since the early 80s, and those people don't look like they've aged, and they have to, like, they've already gone through every single scenario you can imagine with the characters, so they have to repeat some of those, um because they run out of content, um let's see, say, I believe Mandy said, I believe in the paranormal, but I understand when we explain the paranormal to others, it's asking them to change their whole belief system to certain people. Yeah, yes and no. Um, well, there's a lot of things that I never understood about, because seeing ghosts and spirits, humans are very contradictory in our belief systems, because seeing spirits from the time I can remember when I was little, and remembering other lives and things like that, it was very confusing to me to for adults who were teaching me religion at the time, different churches, and I've explored many different religions. Um, it was very confusing for me to have adults tell me that none of these things existed. Yet, here I was going to church, uh, you know, learning about the Holy Spirit, and like all of these that um, Jesus lives forever, and all of these other concepts. But they would tell me that I was crazy, that I saw spirits myself, or that I had a past life. So we are very there's a lot of very conflicting information out there, um as far as belief systems, I guess. Especially around Christmas, it was confusing to me, because you hear all the songs about like the Holy Ghost, all this, and I'm like, but then I get in trouble every time I talk about seeing or talking to a ghost. Yet I'm told to do that every Sunday. So it's it's the system, I tell you. I believe that there's literally billions upon billions of different religious belief systems, because there's as many as there are people, literally, because nobody has the same perception of anything ever. you know um they always say, like, my perception of you is different than your perception of me and vice versa. Which is also a weird concept, when you grow up thinking that everyone thinks the same as you and everyone sees the same, dreams the same, everything like that. I didn't even realize until just because I had never been around anyone that was colorblind, I guess, until I think I was almost in high school, that certain people are colorblind. I'm like, what does that mean? Does that mean they only see in black and white? Um, and I didn't realize there were only certain spectrums that they see in, which is also relevant to the hologram theory, um, or the fact that like animals can see in a much broader color spectrum than humans. So that's why they're much more, like my cat can can spot a fly halfway across the room because of the reflection of its eyes or its wings or whatever, because it sees in that color spectrum. Whereas to me, up close, well, first of all, I'd have to look up close because our eyes aren't as good as theirs, but it would just look, the fly's wings would appear translucent to me, transparent. But that's, again, it's one of those things that you have to see to believe. In these tests, getting back to the Gateway program, they said that many of their participants in these tests indicated significant constructive changes in life attitudes and overview. As far as technology goes, the basics of the gateway training process are the frequency following response, FFR, and hemispheric synchronization, created in the electrical patterns of the brain by the induction of specific sound pulses both singly and binaurally. Binaurally. Or like aura is in your aura, yes, not oral. Into the human auditory system. Robert Monroe was granted a generic patent for this method and technique in 1975 and assigned it to the Institute. By blending these sound pulses, it's possible to aid the individual to develop states of consciousness not ordinarily available to them. Evidence of this is shown in their studies that generate a high amplitude, narrow frequency waveforms sweeping throughout the cortex and direct consequences of such audio signals. Now, the reason this is alarming and fascinating for multiple reasons, because I'm highly sensitive to back when I first got Lyme disease, I lost my hearing for a while, for a few weeks. Um, it's like when people first got COVID and they started losing their sense of taste and smell and everything. So when I got Lyme, I went blind uh, for a little while. Um, and then another, right after that got better or whatever, I would go deaf. I lost every one of my senses at some point. Granted, a lot of those can be attributed to like zinc deficiencies when you get sick, or vitamin D or whatever. But I think due to that, my other senses became much more heightened. Like when I couldn't see, I could hear much better. And whether it was because there wasn't as much scientifically or biologically, however you look at it, on a much simpler base like form, if I couldn't see, then I didn't have as much stimulation coming into my brain, obviously. So I could concentrate on hearing more. Therefore, it literally trained my ears to heighten their awareness. So that was kind of a default mechanism that our bodies use. It's like people who are born blind or deaf or what have you. Um, it, they're much more capable of very detailed sensory perception than most other people, because they're missing one of those senses. So it's an interesting, it's also terrifying though, because everything has a frequency, everything, whether it be a positive or a negative one, as far as the effect it has on the body. And that goes for plants, animals, humans, every single thing. It's like when the Navy started doing the um, sonar tests and experiments in the ocean, and dolphins and such started showing up. They would get either it would kill them, or they would it would change their, it's almost like it caused brain damage. They would be very confused and start acting very differently. So um that's what's scary about frequencies, because like singing, you can sing. If you look at on an audio recorder when you're singing and you look at the frequencies, they're pretty level, but there's certain people, when it's done right and they completely open up their vocal cords to different octave ranges, there's few people, even like opera singers and stuff are different. But when they open that up, that frequency jumps to a healing level, depending on on what type of, I guess, what type of singing they're going for. Um, like I did a report on, the only reason I know about this one, I did a report on Mariah Carey when I was in high school, and at the time, only during that music genre, that era of pop singers and such musicians, um, there were only a few that were still alive that had an octave range that went from a very high frequency to a very low frequency, and she was one of them. Whitney Houston was another one. Um, More recently, Adele. Gosh, there's like Michael Jackson, Prince, a lot of those that had a very wide range of vibrations that they could emit. Sorry, that was something behind me. um, so bees can see 12 different colors, including deep and ultraviolet. Humans can only see 3 colors. Huh. Interesting. And I assume the 3 that humans can see are the red, blue, and green, RBG. There's some people, which is absolutely fascinating, that can that see music in color. Another weird thing after my near-death experience, my last one anyways, I started seeing rainbows everywhere. So I wonder if it's the same, if it was like damage to my um what would it be? It'd be like the frontal lobe of my brain, like the um I don't remember what it's called, but because I would see objects, everyday objects, I in which I've seen, I'm able to see people's auras when I concentrate on that. I'm talking about during that time, I saw rainbows on like on plants, on animals, on many different things, many different. There and then there were like these negative rainbows. I don't know how to explain that, but it was different. It was almost like a different color chart. On things that were toxic, I would see rainbows as well. So certain machinery, certain like polluted water or oil or something. Um, I saw different, I guess, different color variations in rainbows on things. But that's what a lot of this this gateway program, that's what a lot of it was doing, and it's basically admitting that obviously all of these things that we've been arguing whether they exist or not, whether even regardless of whether it's simulation or not, it's basically stating that in their 1,932 participants and over 3,000 tests, that all of these things exist in our reality. Well, see, I would argue, question, are you sure you didn't see the auras? Yes. Yes. As I said, before my that last near death experience, I was able to see auras in people and animals and things sometimes. But this was very different. It was like it was their vibrational frequency, but in color, if that makes sense. I don't know how to explain it. It was very different. But it also, if that's the case, the argument that um, water, air, any of the elements, metals, rocks, things like that, have an actual living energy has been around forever, which goes back. Obviously, I'm pagan. That does go back to my roots. I've gone back as far as in my communication with my ancestors, like 30,000 years, to the paleo tribes of the Southwest, and their belief system was animistic, which believed that anything that comes from the earth or from the universe for that matter can have a living vibrational frequency, which that makes sense because machinery that's made out of metal, or houses and things that are made out of wood and concrete, that's stone, um, that would still hold an energy. And that's why this study is so important, because that means that this would prove, even for like all the paranormal investigators who have had the theory for a very long time, that houses themselves can be haunted. As I mean, the actual foundation of the house, which I've always agreed with. I'm like, of course it can, because it's made out of things that come from the earth. It's made out of the elements that come from the earth, especially older houses. That's wood, and that holds energy, that holds a vibration. I know. I feel like I'm. And so I started researching so much about Helen Keller in this theory, because it's literally how everything communicates. Everything is made up of waves mostly. Yes, absolutely. Um, which is funny. I almost made that my thumbnail for this show. I was going to title that "The Waves of Change." But it, I also found in research with paranormal that it, like water. I was attacked by water once, and nobody believed that concept. They're like, "Well, no, it was probably something in the water that was haunted. It was this, it was that, whatever." No. A- And maybe this comes from my own belief system, as far as, my like native or Celt background, or African, um, that it's like people, well, with anything, with waves, you talk about that, it with water, with the ocean. When I mentioned, um, the Navy doing the experiments with ultrasonic, um, different testing and experiments with that, which can be very, very harmful, um, and different theories of multiple countries or people or scientists or whoever doing experiments to manipulate the weather, or water, like the fracking, or digging for oil, things like these. I've always said that nothing in this world likes to be manipulated. Nothing. I don't care what it is. And so I honor all of the elements in that manner. So when I go into the forest, I'm not going to I I'm not that's that's the forest home. I'm not going to destroy them. I'm going to be respectful. It's just like going into anybody's house. You're not going to, you're not going to walk in and start putting holes in the wall and, get mud all over the floor and things like that. So why would you do that to all of nature or rivers or the ocean or whatever? But I think that's literally how these things, plus water absorbs, it's people and animals and everything else and plants have these energies. So that obviously, um, electromagnetic fields, things like that, that reacts to water. And and so water can be very, very healing, or I think it can be very harmful too, if you don't respect it. So yes, there are so many studies, so many theories, especially in other countries, of water absorbing the negative energy of, say, an entire family or town or what have you. Maybe if something really bad happens somewhere and there's all of a sudden there's fog or something, that would travel, right? And that would be carried to other places, and it would pick up that negative energy. Humans are made up of mostly water. So that's why it's so easy for us. That's why you hear of so many empaths now. That's been around forever, literally. It's just, more recently that we started, I guess, labeling these things. Um, but that's how humans become possessed. Water can be possessed too. I've mentioned that numerous times. If you're in a haunted location, or one where, I mean, every location's haunted technically, I guess. Some just have more history, more energy that's been through there than others. But if there's a very bad energy and you want to move that or relocate it, because energy never dissipates, then you can literally use a jar of water and call that energy to the water. It's like a magnet. So the same concept, with the forest. And people say, well, I think it's the forest. um they blame cryptids. They say maybe it's the fairies or the gnomes or the, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whoever that's doing these things with the actual trees, but they never thought of the concept of the trees themselves holding an energy. Um, which to me, and again, I don't judge anybody's beliefs. This is just how I believe. But trees have roots that are closer to the source than anything else in the world. So obviously, I think that they would have more of that energy and absolutely be able to communicate. Yes, we are mostly and part of the global water cycle. And it is such a crazy thing to me when people are like, "Oh no, like that doesn't, you should eat fish from the Atlantic because they're treated or the, excuse me, the Pacific, because they don't have as much pollution, or they don't have, they're treated better, whatever." Okay, I hope everyone knows that all the water in this world runs together, right? I mean, eventually. Like that's um it's funny to me because and I explained that they had this whole thing at the zoo here last year. I explained to my daughter, excuse me, because they had this exhibit that explained how Missouri and Kansas, the river runs right between them, all the way down to the Gulf, um, and how the effects of fertilizers and pesticides and everything else from crops here, even though we don't have, any major bodies of water in the Midwest, um, it does affect the ocean, because anything that is dumped here, anything that, um, is run. runoff from the crops, especially we do have a lot of floods and such, it goes straight to the river, which goes straight to the ocean. So obviously that affects everything else. I've used the same concept with fire and water, as far as like witches being burned. I'm like, well, all that spread their ashes. If you drown someone, okay, well, it's going to spread. They're still consecrated because it spreads part of their being even more places than it otherwise would have been just burying them. So um all of the elements literally go transfer everywhere in the world. Air, obviously the wind can travel from here to the other side of the world. That's been proven many times, many times, through sandstorms and fires and everything else. So I think we just don't, that's the thing with scientists. A lot of times put make things very difficult for the average person to understand. And I'm not saying average as in unintelligent at all. I'm saying if you're not a specialist in that field, then you might not understand the terminology or what something's called or whatever, what have you. But if you're a giant child like me and you need things broken down in simpler terms, as far as being able to picture the actual concept, then I think that's where the conflict comes from on on basic human understanding of many of these concepts. Um, so so I think that going back, just in case, I was gonna say an interesting thing. I took pictures of some bumblebees at um, a sunflower farm. It was last year. It was last fall. I specifically, it was in a very quiet location. There was no external noise pollution as far as traffic or anything like that. It was on an overcast day, and I took a very close up video of some bees, some bumblebees, on the sunflowers. And when I played it back, when I relayed those videos, I couldn't audibly hear these things with my, while I was there with my ears. And I have really good hearing again. But when I played it back, there's a very distinct sound frequency, even without adjusting the volume or anything else. Just by, putting on headphones or whatever and playing it back, there was a very distinct frequency. And it's not even like the buzzing or the humming of the bee. It fluctuated differently based on its interactions with the flower, its interaction with the other bees. Some of those sounds were coming from the flower, for that matter, and that's been proven in science as well. Right, whatever we eat, drink, or eat enters our blood, and we don't want it to be filthy. The oceans and rivers, however, are the planet's blood that all life form depends on. Right. Which makes no sense to me, why we just constantly dump things into it. I mean, it's no different though than humans. When you think about, uh, again, I'm not criticizing anybody. I fall off that wagon of eating processed food and junks and sweets and everything else all the time. But the same concept with it's like vehicles. It's the same thing. Like, you don't want it, you have to have an air filter. You have to have an oil filter. You have to have if you get bad gas in your fuel tank, then that could literally blow the engine. Eventually it wears it down. You have to keep up maintenance on those things, just like your body and just like we should the earth. I'm surprised, that with the state of the earth now and all of the, the harmful gases, um, based on everything, literally based on, you know, just waste and pollution and not just those like negative things, but also the, um, farming and cattle farms and, um, chickens and everything else that put out the harmful gases into the ozone. But which, again, I mean, yes, we need those things, but a lot of people misinterpret in the spiritual community. They think, especially if they're getting messages from extraterrestrials per se, they told me for a very long time, start eating more plant centered, a more plant centered diet. Start. The reason for that isn't necessarily based on the belief of we shouldn't kill animals, or vice versa, but it's more so the fact to um give the ozone a break. It's not because if there were more vegans, obviously, then we wouldn't have as much of a problem with the gases. But again, I'm not a vegan, so I'm not trying to, I'm just trying to to make people aware of multiple different perspectives as far as that goes. And um, I did a one of my science projects when I was in like third grade, no, fourth grade maybe, was on the greenhouse effect. Um, and and it's something that, we always think, well, there's things happening now that our parents said back then, oh, not in our lifetime. That won't happen in our lifetime. But we shouldn't have that, like, we shouldn't make those statements for that matter. Because if it's not in our lifetime, it's going to be in our future ancestors' lifetimes, and we should care about that. We absolutely should, because that contributes to the human race and how long we actually survive on this planet before we go extinct, which at this rate, we're already at a point of no return almost. And we have been since like the 70s. So which makes you wonder, when they started putting these plans in effect and doing these experiments with holograms and everything else, I'm sure at the point that we knew that we were almost at a point of no return as far as human reproduction and continued existence. I'm sure they knew about it way before we did, as far as their, tests and statistics and everything else. So if that's the case, then it makes sense why they started doing these studies way back then, and why there's people like, is it Vivos, the group that does stores DNA, um, in other countries, that's secret locations that is not accessed by the government, things like that. That's basically, a Noah's Ark. Oh, again, that concept had to come from somewhere, right? Um, and I've been a vegan for 15 years. Oh, a porcupine. Oh my goodness. I've never tried a porcupine. I'm not, so the only reason I'm not a vegan yet, and I don't eat that much meat, but when I got really sick, uh I started studying different blood type diets, and people are much like animals, as far as that goes. There's like the herbivores and the carnivores, and certain blood types require and process protein differently. I couldn't sustain, if I'm sick, I can't live off of a plant-based diet, because there would be no way for my body to get enough protein, even with supplements, and supplements to my specific, um there's, oh gosh, there's so many things that come with, immune deficiency, um, or immune suppressant illnesses that, like synthetic supplements, I react to opposite most people. So there's reasons, I am trying to gravitate towards veganism, but um I have not. And when I grew up in the mountains, I did eat, we ate squirrels when we would go cut wood and things like that. And no, I'm not talking about the city squirrel you see. These were like giant forest squirrel, like black squirrels and stuff. But and then in the south, of course, down the swamp by by where I lived, most they had these little general stores, and all they had were snake and rabbit, and they even had, alligator and coon and possum and things like that. And so we don't use, that's the problem. We don't utilize everything we have. And so when people are saying there's a grocery shortage and everything's getting more expensive and everything, I'm like, are you kidding me? You could go in your backyard and find so many things to eat. Not just animal, like, or not just plants that are, things that we destroy every day, There's so many healing herbs and wildflowers and things like that, what people consider weeds. Um Slugs, snails, like you could technically eat many worms, many things um to survive off of. And for that matter, I'm actually starting, for anybody that's interested, in the new year, I will, uh, well, it might be January 2nd because January 1st is New Year's, but in January, I am premiering. I have a whole, I don't know, because people have asked me so many times, um, fitness slash clean eating slash um like do it yourself type channel and recipes and things that I'm going to be putting out, because there's so many things that I didn't realize that like I said, I thought growing up um in the woods, I thought it was normal until I was around other people and realized that not everybody knows how to make their own, you know fuel, or even simple things like dishwasher detergent, things like that. I didn't realize that that's not taught anymore in a lot of places. So um, that will be coming out. That will be coming out on my other YouTube channel in January. So be looking for that. Um, oh wow, my ex couldn't eat meat. She likes an enzyme, so she can't break down animal. Yeah, there's a lot of people like that. Meat is so poisonous to her that she can die from eating a slice of bacon. Wow. Um, it's Has she heard of the MTHFR gene factor? I call it the mother effer because it is. That's what it is. And there's certain people that are born with that. Um, which I didn't even know about. I had no idea that this existed until I was interviewed by Reverend Jen Moore. She was actually on my show a couple months ago. She was on my show twice. She does the empathic mastery and EFT tapping, and amazing person. That interview will be coming out in the spring, I believe, on her channel. But while we were talking, she asked me if I had ever heard of that, since I'm a Chimera and have had all these different autoimmune issues, as far as like Hashimoto's and Lyme disease and hypothyroidism and all the. And no, I'm not just a hypochondriac. I didn't even know half of those things existed. So until a doctor told me, and I don't really go to traditional doctors much anymore, if ever. But I'm not. Now, don't somebody go turn me in and say that no, I'm not suggesting that. I am not a doctor. Do not, make sure you you check with your doctor on anything. I'm saying from my personal experience and beliefs, I had to learn to heal myself. And I think that's the problem, is that we've become so codependent on this system. The system that everyone both, it's like a love-hate relationship. Like, we loathe it, but we're so dependent upon it. Like, we don't even know how to make our own food anymore. We don't know how to, and we it's all of our faults. We can't point the finger at anyone. We've allowed this to happen. I was about to say they don't teach this in schools anymore. But then I thought, no, that's okay. Well, that's why I started teaching my own children these concepts. That's why my parents taught me how to do certain things myself. But a lot of people can't. It is getting harder, even as a single parent, it's hard for me to teach my kids a lot of things that my parents taught me, because I don't have as much time, because things are more expensive. You know what I mean? Like, housing's more expensive, and gas and everything. So it's a double-edged sword on that. But as far as being much more, I'm trying to become much more dependent, or much more independent from the system of these things, because if you all knew how much healthier and less expensive and easy these things are to make yourself, or to do yourself, you would be like, why wasn't I doing that all along? And a lot of these things I've adapted to doing kind of by default, because I did get sick, but it took me getting sick and dying. And dying. Don't say, oh, you have it easy because you're a trainer and blah blah blah. No, I became a trainer to heal myself. I became a trainer by default, and studied nutrition and herbal nutrition and everything else, because doctors said there's nothing else they could do for me, that I was going to die. So you have to make that choice. Like, you have to decide, okay, are you going to live the way someone else tells you to live, and base your survival on that, on farm, even recently pharmacies. My therapist said that they don't have, people aren't getting medicine because there aren't enough pharmacists. Okay, well, nobody thought about that. I mean, yes, we have a shortage of doctors and nurses, but nobody thought, oh, well, what happens when there aren't pharmacies? Where are you going to get your medicine from? So that's why you can't depend. What if if you've ever been in an area, there's a natural disaster. I've lived in plenty of places where there's been like an ice storm or a snowstorm, and everything shuts down for weeks. And I mean weeks, because nobody can access these places. So, um, she's very much into the research behind her illness. See, it's and I struggle with this, because I absolutely, absolutely love animals. So again, I only eat meat for the most part if I know where it came from and how it was raised. Um, and there's many reasons for this, because I've talked about this with the extraterrestrials. Some of them are absolutely carnivores and will eat us one day. But it's the same concept. Like, if we're being harvested for food, for something, whether it be for um, the plants, or um, ETs, or whatever. Uh, I mean, they still want us to have, well, some of us, they still, want their cattle to have good lives, even though they know at the end of the day they're going to eat them. That doesn't mean they're going to mistreat treat us along the way. To an extent, some do. Um, the same with plants. I've also been questioned that why I'm not vegetarian or vegan. Um, I have a very, very strong connection to plants. I started communicating with them after that last heart attack. And who's to say that plants don't feel any more or less than animals? You know, why, at what point, at what, I've been studying, and now you talk about, oh, it's 441 in Denmark. Again, over the last year, I looked at my sleep record, how many hours of sleep I get on average. I get 4 hours of sleep on average for the entire year, which is crazy. Like, I need way more. Well, you would think I need more rest than that. But what I started doing when I talk about not harming plants or animals or people or anything else, neuro-linguistic research, um, which I'm still in the process of studying and going through, um, you can program your mind to do miraculous things. You could program your mind to go without water, because what it would do is it would store it differently. It would, you, you could literally, we would be prepared for almost any situation on earth if we actually use the other part of our brain that we haven't been. You know, you could program your brain to do more healing in less amount of time, or vice versa. Like, you could program your brain to speed up your metabolism or slow it down, or your heart rate, or anything. Biofeedback, the concept's been around since Egyptian times. So I think, you know, at the same time, it's a circle of life. Everything has its place. Everything. Um, all the way down to the tiny um microbes, and you know, bacteria, and everything has its place. Everything has a purpose. Everything does something. The difference is, humans are probably the only thing on this entire planet, if not the universe, that are so egotistical to think that we're the only ones that matter. You know, so the next time you walk through the forest, or anywhere for that matter, think about where you're stepping. Think about where you're stepping. Are you stepping on a plant? Are you stepping on an anthill? Are you mindlessly, you know, you might have destroyed an entire village, for that matter, of little that some bug or plant species lived in. You could have just taken out their entire town and you didn't even know it, and you didn't even care. You didn't even look back. So let that be let that be your mission in I guess in 2023. Watch where you step. And on that note, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening. Um, I do hope to make a trip. Not only quite a few. I want to do a lot more traveling in the new year. So I do hope to make a trip to New Orleans soon. And um, if any of you have any suggestions on where I should go or what I should do, you know, I haven't been back there in probably like 300 years, maybe more. I think 480 something. So, um, let me know. Let me know what's changed since then, I guess. Um, Thank you to Carnation for sponsoring me. And again, if you missed any part of this, we do re-upload. I don't know if a lot of you realize this, but I'm going to get better about putting these things in the comments. But we do re-upload on, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Podbean, um, Amazon Music now, all of your Apple Music, as well as my YouTube channel, and Facebook group and page, I guess. So I'm gonna have some musical guests in the near future back on. And again, my from um, the Monroe Research, or the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences, and their research with the CIA and these various different, the Gateway program, which the East Coast was Faber, Virginia, and the West Coast was San Francisco. You can see so much about their different sessions, so much about their, they provide different links and such for their participants and what happened to them during these and their higher consciousness. They even give tips on how to astral project, which is very interesting. So you can go see all of that on the CIA.gov website under the Freedom of Information Act, and there's some other really interesting things on that website. So I do highly suggest visiting that. Again, if you're afraid to on your own computer, go to a library or somewhere. I don't know. Make sure you get to that. Other than that, everyone have a good week. Have a safe week, and we will see you next time on The Missing Piece. Thank you. Good night.